Hi, AppSec engineers. In this video, I'm going to be talking to you about a very important topic that has kind of become an essential thing for any organization to implement, which is basically secure by design. So this video, we'll be looking at secure by design or secure design with AWS specifically in mind. And if you stay till the end, I'm going to give you a special bonus recommendation for AWS for implementing secure by design with AWS. Let's get started, and let's get started now. Before we get started in secure by design for AWS, first let's understand what secure by design is. Now, secure by design is a software development process or software development approach which essentially takes the security as one of the top loaded considerations right from the get-go, which means that right from the beginning of the project or right from the inception of the project, security is considered one of the key focus areas of the project. And this is a very important thing simply because now you have organizations like the CISA and other governments that require you to do this from the get-go. So it's not an optional thing anymore. It used to be that way. But today, secure by design is becoming some things that governments are insisting on, contractors are insisting on, customers are insisting on, regulations required today. And secure by design is not only a good to have today, it's also fast becoming an essential when you are building applications of several natures, regardless of what kind of nature it is. If you're building applications that handle personally identifiable information, financial information, or anything healthcare information in that subset, you are required to do this in order to meet certain contractual requirements, regulatory requirements, or basically to avoid liability from government organizations or legal liability itself. So secure by design really is all about how you can build in security or bake in security right from the inception of the project. Now, a very good question that a lot of you ask would be, does this mean that I already have a project, I already have an existing application, or I already have an existing environment? Can't I do secure by design there? Now, to a certain extent, the answer is no. But really, what you can do to put in secure by design is to go back to the drawing board, figure out what you can do from a security perspective, and then add those things into the project. Now, that might take you a little bit more time, but that is still a way to achieve secure by design with an existing or an already operational project, which a lot of us have. And this is something to think about. Now, with that in mind, I'm going to focus on a few key services and what those services can do in AWS that can help you achieve secure by design. These are all native services. You don't need additional tools for this. These are native services within AWS that you can use for secure by design. Now, without doubt, the first element of anything secure by design is access control, right? Access control forms like the basis of any secure design, because if you get access control wrong, there's a good chance that you'll get a lot of other things related to it wrong. So with AWS, access control obviously is a significantly important topic. And the way to think about access control with AWS is to master the IAM or to focus extensively on the IAM or the identity and access management. Now, AWS gives you a comprehensive framework to do identity and access management. It gives you libraries, it gives you tools. IAM is one of the cornerstones of AWS security and by extension, your application security that are hosted on AWS. So IAM is going to be the most important thing to think about, especially from access control perspective, which means you need to deal with authentication, you're dealing with authorization, you're dealing with access control in a more holistic sense. Now, IAM essentially means that you want to ensure that there is least privilege for the resources that are running in AWS, which means that let's say you have a Lambda function or a container, you don't want to give that container or that particular Lambda function excessive privileges, because those privileges can mean that somebody can compromise that asset and then use that to pivot into your AWS account. So privilege escalation is a very real possibility. In fact, I cover this in my trainings. In fact, in my Black Hat training that is happening on attacking and defending AWS, Azure, and GCP applications, I look at several scenarios where we start off with a compromise of an application, and that leads to a huge series of dominoes falling on AWS because of IAM failures or excessive privileges in IAM. Now, this is one of the main things that you have to keep in mind. So IAM is the most important ecosystem. You need to think about how to design with IAM, which means that how to set up least privilege. You also need to think about how you can enforce least privilege, that is, not allow people to just change their IAM policies or not allow administrators to set up bad IAM policies. This is something you need to think about. You also need to think about auditing IAM. Thankfully, AWS gives you services to do all three things. So for instance, if you can use IAM policies and IAM roles and so on and so forth. You can use SSO for user access along with IAM roles. Of course, with services, you always have IAM roles and policies that you can link up to. You can also use things like IAM permission boundaries if you're using users to ensure that users don't increase the bounds of their policies that they have. Aside from that, you have multiple authentication techniques with AWS, either in terms of user access or in terms of access by services. In fact, even services that are outside of AWS can use IAM roles anywhere. In fact, there is a very important playground in AppSecEngineer at IAM roles anywhere, where you can have third-party resources from on-prem or other cloud environments talk to AWS environments much more securely. You have all those things, as well as the fact that you have things like IAM Access Analyzer, where you can use the IAM Access Analyzer to identify which policies are, excessive, which policies are set up correctly or not set up correctly based on the kind of activities that are happening in your AWS account. So these are things that you need to keep in mind with IAM. Outside of IAM, there is also another element of access management that a lot of people don't consider but is equally important, which is service control policies. Now, you are likely an organization that is running multiple AWS accounts. You need to think about service control policies, because these service control policies can be enforced at an organization level across multiple accounts and multiple organization units that can restrict the access of certain services doing some things in the first place, right? So service control policy is a great way of restricting access along with IAM. So you need to think about both these two frameworks and ecosystems that can help you achieve very comprehensive access control with AWS. The other very ignored but essential element of Secure by Design is logging, monitoring, and the ability to trace things, right? So that's basically one of the things that a lot of people don't think about. They always look at preventing things from happening, which is good. I'm not saying you should not prevent things from happening, but you also want to be able to monitor and identify issues that are happening in the other one. And this is something that AWS gives you a ton of services to be able to use. First of all, you have CloudTrail, which allows you to harness control plane logs. All of the activities that are happening in an AWS account are captured by CloudTrail. So using CloudTrail, setting up separate trails on CloudTrail, using that in your security data lake or your data warehouse to be able to perform queries, to be able to identify potential anomalies and things like that is a great thing to do. At the network level, you have VPC mirroring, flow logs, and so on that allows you to capture network traffic and see whether there's some indicators of compromise there. So you have CloudTrail, which gives you control plane logs. You also gives you things like VPC flow logs and things like that you can help. All of this can be leveraged with CloudWatch, which is the time series database, the logging service that gives you not only logging functionality with AWS, it also gives you comprehensive metrics, comprehensive alarms, things like that. A lot of these features that you can use to actually set up a very strong security monitoring practice can be done with CloudWatch. Now, this is around the logging and monitoring piece itself. But outside of this, you have a whole bunch of logging and monitoring capabilities that is there for, vulnerability management, incident response, and so on. So things like, for instance, AWS Inspector can give you a detailed view of all the vulnerabilities that you have across different workloads. It could be an EC2 server, it could be container images, it could be Lambda functions. You have a comprehensive view of what's happening in terms of vulnerabilities in terms of those assets. You have AWS Guard Duty that uses the power of machine learning and rules to be able to identify potential compromises. So let's say your credentials for a particular service have been compromised and somebody is using that outside an AWS environment or inside another AWS environment, then you have Guard Duty that can detect those things. Now, all of these can be hooked up to automation capabilities like using Lambda functions to start doing automated incident response. Now, outside of this, you also have things like AWS Detective and AWS Security Hub, Now, AWS Detective is used along with, it harnesses multiple services like your guard duty, your VPC flow logs. It harnesses all of these services and gives you detective-like capabilities, which means that it tells you that this is an incident that I discovered, and this is the timeline of the incident. These are the affected assets. Do what you want with them, right? You can start to perform more comprehensive incident response and incident analysis based off of AWS Detective. Security Hub is a centralized place that you can store all your security related data, vulnerability related data related to all your AWS assets and non-AWS assets. So let's say you have applications that you want to be able to track, vulnerabilities that you want to be able to track. You have a specialized format called the Amazon Security Findings format, and you can start pushing those results into a single dashboard where you can start seeing and start remediating many of those security issues. So that's something that you can do with Security Hub. Now, this is just a small indicator, right? You have so many other services. You have Macy, you have several other services that can help you do incident response monitoring with AWS. And this is just native AWS services. Outside of this, let's say you deploy a SIM or whatever it is, you get all the additional capabilities of all of that as well. But logging and monitoring is a critical piece of AWS, and it's something that you have to think about when you are thinking about secure by design. One of the most important considerations when you're thinking about secure by design is encryption. Now, with AWS, you have a very comprehensive keystone encryption service, which is called your KMS. Now, KMS is like a baseline service, just like IAM, except that you don't see it that much. Maybe you're not using it that much, but it is extremely powerful and extremely necessary when you're dealing with secure by design. So when you want to encrypt workloads, or you want to encrypt your data that is stored in disk, stored on S3, whatever it is, you are using Amazon Key Management Service. Understanding Amazon Key Management Service is extremely important because that gives you all the abilities to do your encryption, both from a symmetric and asymmetric perspective. So let's say you want to sign things, you can use Amazon Key Management Service. Let's say you want to encrypt data, you can use the symmetric capabilities of Amazon Key Management Service. All of this becomes extremely important when you want to protect your data that is stored at rest. It could be in a database, it could be in S3, it could be anywhere else, right? So Amazon Key Management Service becomes very, very critical. It is also one of the services that is integrated with all other services, right? So let's say you want to use the server-side encryption with Amazon S3, then you are still under the hood using KMS. Right? And for those of you who need more capability or more functionality from your encryption, you can consider using Amazon's Cloud HSM, which is also key management system, but it uses an HSM functionality in the back that is required for certain types of companies like banks and so on and so forth. So encryption is a key piece of secure by design, and Amazon KMS and its allied services helps you do that comprehensively. Now, coming to our bonus, I promised you that I'll give you a bonus at the end of the video. And this is a service that is not known to a lot of people who are working in Amazon. Even extensive users of AWS do not know of this feature, which is AWS verified permissions. Now, this is the type of access control and access control implementation that you can implement for objects, right? So let's say you want your application to have object level access control and you don't want to hard code it into your application, then what you should be using is a service called AWS Verified Permissions, where you can use a specialized domain specific language called Cedar, and you can set up access control rules for administrators, for super administrators, for regular users, for certain types of users. You can set up very, very granular object level access control. In fact, Cedar is so powerful that you can use it as the basis of defining access control for everything. It doesn't have to be only AWS specific resources. It can be queried as an API, and of course, you can use this to comprehensively trace the access control calls and audit logs that you have for different objects within your AWS environment and even outside your AWS environment. So AWS Verified Permissions is one of those things that kind of extends access control, but it's a different dimension of access control because it focuses on your application specific access control specifically for objects and the type of access parameters you want to set for objects in AWS. This is something that's very important for you to understand. This is underutilized. I've also made a bunch of videos on AWS Verified Permissions. You can check this out as well. So to conclude, secure by design is achievable and it is something that you have to consider doing. It is essential in my opinion. And the good thing is if you're on AWS, you can do all of this with AWS services itself. Native AWS services themselves can help you achieve all of your goals in terms of secure by design. It's very important for you to understand how they work, why they work the way they work, which is why your team needs to have a good amount of awareness and knowledge on each of these services and how they can work. Of course, AppSecEngineer can help you. Our platform is specifically designed to train you and your team on these sort of things. But this is something you have to think about when you are implementing Secure by Design. So I wish you all the best for your Secure by Design journey if you're on AWS. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you have any suggestions and comments, please let me know. I'll always be happy to include it or make other videos on that particular topic. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in another one.